Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Tuesday, January the 13th, I hope. In Victoria, BC, I'd like to start by thanking the volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes it all happen. The first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack show, so away we'll go. It's been, the weeks are getting crazier. This week, I'm going to start off with the attack in Paris. I think there's two possibilities. One possibility is that the official story being put out by the corporate media and many politicians is true. It's possible that the official story is true, and it is exactly what they make it out to be. And then there's a possibility that the official story is not true, and this was a false flag attack. I'll just mention Operation Gladio. If anybody wants to Google Operation Gladio, Gladio, you'll find many stories about a very similar thing run by the CIA and the security forces, the intelligence forces in many European countries in the 1970s. Hundreds of people were killed, again run by the people who ran the United States, basically, and the corporate power behind them all. Bombings throughout Europe in the 1970s, hundreds of people killed, culminating in a bombing attack in Bologna, Italy, in a train station that killed about 80 people. And the reason was social democratic forces were becoming more popular. And the corporate governments that the US had put in place after the war were weakening. So in order to prop up their government, the people they liked, they associated the other parties with the bombings. And this is on the record, and yet here we are, not that many years later. They don't even mention to us what has happened in the past, because if we knew about Operation Gladio, and I only know by the sheerest of good luck, if we knew our history, we would question what's happening and look for the actual evidence and the truth and independent investigation instead of the corporate media story that's forced onto us.
Well, right, Jack. Is it the official line that we're going to believe, or is there something else happening? And if you look at the evidence, and if you look at just some of the things that have come out, that on the side, for instance, one of the things that blew my mind is when you sent me the email telling me that the chief of police that was in charge of investigating the Charlie...
Not chief of police, it's different titles there, but a high-level police official involved in the investigation.
In the investigation was found dead in his office with a shot in the head. And what was startling was
that suicide.
They reported it as being a suicide, but the thing was that they didn't report it at all. That's not in the mainstream media. So the guy that was playing a very major role in this investigation, while it was ongoing, this is not when the final gun battles occurred, was dead. That's startling to me, because that would really, he'd play a key role in perhaps getting the truth out. Now, my main concern is, and we have weeks and months to find the facts as best we can, but if there is another agenda afoot, and if that agenda is similar to this Operation Gladio, is to suppress democratic activities, to suppress citizens' involvement in government and creating a fairer world, if there's another agenda on the go, as there has been in the past, what would that look like? And to me, it seems almost like a kind of a perfect sort of a scenario where they frame the issue as the attacks on Charlie Hebdo is as an issue of now it's defending freedom of expression, and the public clamors now for their own governments to fight terrorism, therefore to bring in more restrictive laws in their own countries, bring in more surveillance, bring in lessening of our own civil liberties and our own civil rights. And in fact, what's happening is that we're all losing our our rights and liberties in our efforts to fight this so-called threat to terrorism. And I'm very, very concerned that this might be happening.
Yeah, personally, I think the corporations and the 1% of the 1% are taking over the world, and have been for, I mean, more than they had 20, 30, 40 years ago. They complained about too much democracy 20, 30, 40 years ago, so they simply decided to take it over. And of course, if you're a very small, very powerful force and you intend to take over nations, you need something to keep everybody busy with while you're doing that. So amongst other things, you create a terror threat and you create wars. And while we're focused here, they control. And there was, I mean, it's happening all around us now with what happened in Kinder Morgan in Burnaby just a month ago. Part of that story was 100 people were arrested. Some of them, I believe, were tortured by the local police forces that arrested them because they put on the handcuffs too tight and too tight behind their back. And they were kept on like that for hours and hours and hours. And people had some pretty serious damage done to them for no reason. I mean, you can't clip them off and put on something looser. These were your local citizens, heroes. And yet they were arrested and tortured or not tortured, kept for hours, confined. And there had been a lawyer on radio just a day or so before saying that why is the RCMP arresting people when this issue is still before the courts? Burnaby, the city of Burnaby was in court trying to stop Kinder Morgan from what they were doing. That was still before the courts, but here are the RCMP and other police forces arresting 100, I would say, heroic citizens.
Yeah.
And the lawyers, and it was the next day that the whole thing stopped, right? The next day, Kinder Morgan said, oh, we gave everybody the wrong information, and another judge overruled it. But what I heard the day before was the whole thing may be completely illegal, and that's where our country is now.
Yeah.
With citizens being arrested on behalf of oil companies and tortured. So it's not that far away from us. And what happened in Ottawa in October with the shooting in Parliament, what's happening now in Paris, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't say I'm right, but to me it seems like that's the plan, that's the agenda, because that's what's happening.
Well, there's two things in my mind, and number one is that this feeling of tension worldwide, and that we're sort of entering into a very, very dangerous time, much like the world was before 9/11, when the first Bush regime was elected. They had no mandate. They're itching to get into a war. They were looking for some type of provocation, and all of a sudden, wasn't that a coincidence? There was attacks on the United States, which brought us into the Iraq War and all the death and destruction. So that's number one. The other thing that I stumbled upon was, looking at these issues around what laws and stuff are happening, what our federal government is doing. And I stumbled upon the fact that Stephen Harper, the fellow that's really lined up with the state of Israel and promoting, supporting the state of Israel over the rights of the Palestinians, in my view, and fighting the war on terror, which is really fighting a war on Muslims. And here Stephen Harper now made a deal with General Dynamics to manufacture $10 billion worth of arms to sell to Saudi Arabia, the most repressive Islamic state in the region, the government that has the most repressive view of human rights. And here Harper's saying, oh, we're fighting for peace in the Middle East. And then he turns around, he's selling arms to Saudi Arabia, and we really don't know where they're going to go from there. So
ISIS?
So really, what is it? What is it, Mr. Harper? What do you really stand for?
So is Canada, there's a $10 billion deal for Canadian companies to sell?
Right. Sell arms to Saudi Arabia. So what do you take more heavily, the actions of the government or the rhetoric. I think you better look at the actions of this government.
The thing is, we never know the actions because
Yeah.
we don't have a free press in the country, so all we hear is the rhetoric.
But this is why I'm saying, you know, it fits into the same rhetoric about protecting your freedom of expression and all that, and then bringing in repressive laws. And here they are talking about wanting peace in the Middle East, and they're selling arms to the most repressive regime in the Middle East.
Well, I would have to agree, and I would say this whole thing of a war on terror, which is being fought by the United States and Canada too,
Yeah.
it's not a war on terror, it's a war of terror.
Yeah.
It's us, we. I mean, if you lived anywhere in the Middle East, if you were just an average citizen like all of us are, who are the terrorists? 1.5 million people, innocent people, have died because of the war in Iraq. Libya, a Canadian general led the bombing, NATO bombing of Libya. It went from the most prosperous country in Africa, now it's a failed state. That's the plan. I mean, we have really got to wake up and figure out what's going on. Well, no, I shouldn't say wake up, because a lot of people we know what's going on. But the power that keeps us in their grasp, it's amazing, just amazing.
You know, Joe Clark is coming here next week talking about, you know, how Canada should go back to our previous role as being peacekeepers and bringing about negotiations and working through the UN and all that. And I think people would do well to go and listen to Joe Clark and see what he has to say, because we have moved so far away from that now. We're a belligerent state that attacks other states. We're like, we've invaded Syria. You know, it's not that, you know, we're over there dropping bombs and killing people. And on what analysis are we doing that? Did Stephen Harper and these guys really have that background to be able to make those sort of strategic decisions? You know, really? You know, Stephen Harper that's selling the arms to Saudi Arabia? You know, one should really question what their motivations are.
We wanted to show you a video today of just one last thing about the shootings in Paris. There was something that a lot of people saw on television. It was of a policeman lying on the ground, and then one of the two murderers walked over to him with an AK-47 and shot him in the head. I think that got a fairly big play in the media, and that police officer is officially dead. But there's a video going around now on YouTube that shows that, in fact, he wasn't shot. It's clear that the policeman was not shot. You can maybe see it at the website, stormcloudsgathering.com. That's stormcloudsgathering.com. We wanted to show that video today because we think it's important, because this hasn't been shown on television anywhere in Canada, as far as I know, or the United States. They'll never let this be shown, because it shows that part of the official story is a lie. Now, we've got an ongoing dispute with Shaw, unfortunately, about whether we have the right, which I believe we clearly do under Canadian Copyright Act, to show this kind of material. So at the moment we can't. It's an important piece of film. I hear that it's been taken down from YouTube twice already or something. So stormcloudsgathering.com. And that's maybe, don't trust the media. Don't trust the media on this whole issue. Don't trust your politicians. I don't know where we can get information, but it's a mess.
Well, we're going to talk a lot more about this in the weeks to come, Jack.
Or not. You know, things are moving so fast that in 2 weeks' time, this may seem like trivial, and there'll be even worse things. But who's behind it? That's the question.
Yeah.
You know, here locally, there are also some very serious things going on that are also so strange. And it has to do with Saanich. The new mayor of Saanich Richard Atwell has said that spyware was put on his computer. Saanich staff were instructed to put spyware on his computer. And also, in the last 2 months, before he was elected mayor and since, he's been stopped 4 times by the Saanich police, or no, not the Saanich police, but the group, whatever it is, that are on the lookout for drinking drivers,
Yeah.
and forced to do a breathalyzer twice. I mean, most people, if you stopped once in your life, it's something. 4 times in 2 months. So what is going on in Saanich? There are some serious problems there.
You know, I drive a service van every day, Jack. I drive every day in my job for the last 30 or 40 years. I can't remember ever being pulled over. I mean, it must have happened a couple of times. So it is very strange that he was stopped 4 times. And, you know, the police have to have a reasonable suspicion of something before they pull you over. That's the police just can't pull over anybody they feel like any time. There has to be a rationale behind their actions. I think the mayor has a real concern here. We should all be concerned with what is going on with this type of activity, pulling him over. And on the issue about the spyware, I agree with you. This is about as strange as it gets. Why are they loading spyware onto the mayor's computer? And they don't seem to want to talk too much about that issue, but for me, that's very troubling. The mayor of my city is being spied upon. Who is doing the spying and what are they doing? You know, we have to get to the bottom of that. That looks like to me like criminal activity. And by the way, the behavior of the police too is very questionable. This is very close to harassment. You know, that's a very close to a criminal code violation. And to think that they could just go ahead and do that troubles me too. Are we next, when we leave the show tonight, are we going to start getting pulled over because we think that this is not a good idea? That's how we enter into a police state. You know, we can't let that go. These things have to get to the bottom of. We have to know exactly what's occurred. I hope the Times Colonist will report that.
Well, you know, I think the Times Colonist has chosen, because the Times Colonist has chosen, instead of focusing on these 2 very important public issues, to focus on a very private issue instead.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, it's typical of the way the media in this city operate.
Yeah, well, I think they're trying to make the private issues of Richard Atwell's life overshadow the real issues that we all should be concerned about this.
Exactly.
And
yes.
What are they doing? They're acting like a shoddy little tabloid, you know, and they're not really giving us real reporting. And this is very serious stuff. Again, I hope we can cover this more, and perhaps if we have a chance, we might be able to have Mayor Atwell on the show and get an update directly from him.
There was a quote on the CFAX website today, I think. It was from a councillor in Saanich talking about this issue, and the headline of the story was computers not a secret, something like that was the headline. And she says, Mayor and council were informed in December about some security measures. And I don't know when in December this was, it doesn't say. But how can the mayor and council be informed about security measures that involve the ability to basically, when you're typing on the computer, whoever they are, they're reading it as you're typing. So who informs the mayor and council that this is being done to them? Aren't the mayor and council supposed to be the ones we elect to kind of, you know, it's a bit, I've dealt with some serious local issues over the last 20 years. And I often get the feeling that our counselors and councils are just not able to protect us from the staff and others.
Don't they understand the gravity of the situation? There's a difference between security, protecting your privacy, protecting your data, and putting spyware on your computer. You know, there's a big difference here. Are they not kind of getting a handle on this?
And what about the mayor being stopped 4 times in 2 months by the police?
And well, if this was such a good idea,
Where's
for
the
instance,
outrage?
Jack, the spyware, why are they installing it now? Did Mayor Leonard never had it on his computer for 18 years while he was mayor? All of a sudden, it was a good idea when Mayor Atwell took over. Doesn't that seem a bit strange to you? Anyway, they're supposed to sort some of this out tonight at the Sandwich Council meeting. So we'll.
And that's another thing. I mean, the public is getting all the reports and documents and police reports all seem to be secret. The meetings are held in camera.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking about spyware placed on the mayor's computer and mayor being pulled over 4 times. Why is this secret?
Yeah.
I mean, there's got to be the full glare of light and a breeze blowing through, or bad things happen.
Exactly.
Walter, thank you very much.
Always a pleasure, Jack.
Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Hello and welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum. We're joined in this segment by historian Larry Hennant, who teaches at both Camosun College and the University of Victoria. We're going to be talking about the Christmas truce, which occurred a long time ago in World War I, and how the Christmas truce has entered the public debate recently and gained some media attention as well. So welcome, Larry, and you're going to sort of set up the story for us, and then we'll get into it.
Mm-hmm. Well, last year, of course, in the summer, was the 100th anniversary of the beginning of the First World War. So there was a lot of media attention to that and public attention. But then in December, there was a kind of new attention, and particularly it occurred in Britain, where there was there was a lot of advertisements and new promotions and organizational interest in the Christmas truce that happened in December of 1914. I don't know whether the viewers would particularly be familiar with the Christmas truce. It's becoming more popular because, or known about, because there's been a film, there's even an opera, and some writing about it as well. But what happened on December 24th, 25th of 1914, 5 months after the beginning of the war, that British and German troops in Belgium and France, hearing the other side singing Christmas carols. Of course, in the German tradition, you celebrate more on Christmas Eve. They picked that up and started to sing themselves, and this began a move spontaneous towards fraternization, and in some cases that night, in some cases the next morning on Christmas Day, the two sides did move into no man's land, and exchanged gifts and had photos taken with one another, and shared apparently a game of soccer or games of soccer, because this was happening in several locations along the 400-mile long front line. So this has gained new attention, and in particular, this past Christmas, there was attention from the British Legion, which represents veterans of, in particular, the more recent wars, Iraq and Afghanistan and Britain, and also the royalty, significant corporations, the British Football Association, have all kind of jumped on the bandwagon of marking this Christmas truce of 1914. I should add, it wasn't duplicated. It happened only that once. Right? So I guess several historians have taken up the question and have asked, what is it about the this moment, which seems to be sort of a celebration of peace? Why would the British Legion suddenly sort of see this as worthwhile supporting? And the British Football Association has actually sent around packages to school children, 30,000 packages to school children about what happened in 1914. So the debate has sprung up about why this particularly would be of interest to pretty establishment figures and organizations. So I guess the debate has revolved around one. Some people say this is an important moment to commemorate, a moment when soldiers on both sides sort of took up the cause of peace, and sort of certainly seemed to be genuinely sort of concerned about their fellows on the other side of no man's land.
Of course, because they're human beings.
They are, yes, right, and it seems like a worthwhile sort of moment to commemorate, but. Adam Hochschild, who has a really interesting book called To End All Wars, the story of loyalty and rebellion in the First World War, has in a piece in Tom Dispatch sort of asked, what is it about this moment that would see these sort of significant corporations and organizations sort of jumping on the bandwagon? I should add there was also a very moving sort of advertisement created for the Sainsbury's sort of food store chain in Britain, in which you see a full-scale sort of costume recreation of this event, and it is filmed at night, and during the day the football match occurs, and it revolves around a British soldier who gets a little package on Christmas Eve, and in that package he has there's a chocolate bar, and he takes that chocolate bar out into no man's land, and he exchanges it. We don't see entirely what happens, but it turns out that at the end of this, the German soldier on the other side opens reaches into his coat and finds there's the chocolate bar, and you get this warm and fuzzy feeling about fraternity in war.
So what's the argument, or
what is it? Well, that's a good point, and I think Hochschild particularly emphasizes that this is being celebrated because it changed nothing. It did not, as he says, challenge the sovereignty of war. It was authorized by lower level officers, never duplicated because senior level officers would not tolerate that again. But it didn't happen again, and indeed, as we know, troops then descended, and the two sides descended into even further carnage and death and destruction.
They probably hadn't even started when this happened, and they were forced, by the crazy. I mean, there are real questions about the real reasons behind World War I, and certainly it's not what we're always told. But they massacred those young men by the tens of thousands on both sides, just forcing them to run into machine gun fire. It's completely insane.
Yes, the utter contempt of the commanders for the lives of the men they were seeing killed and wounded.
And I assume the commanders were following their orders from higher up the...
Absolutely, yes, right. And indeed, the British commander at the beginning of one of the battles said, only 7,000 sort of casualties today. What's going on? We need higher casualty count. This was British soldiers killed, right? So, his contempt for the lives of the soldiers was sort of complete, right? So, Hochschild has basically argued, and I think it's a valid argument, that in effect, corporations are seizing on this because it makes you feel good about this moment, an interlude in the war. And indeed, as companies and countries are finding, it makes good sense to celebrate war in a sense. I mean, France and Belgium are benefiting greatly from the tourist traffic that is happening around the First World War over the course of, over about 4.5 years. They stand to benefit very greatly from tourism, tourists coming to see the carnage, right, or the remains of the carnage. So one could say that peace activists would want to take this up as well, but this was a point that I think is maybe worth debating a little more. Is it something that peace activists should take up? And we in the peace community, I guess the Victoria, various groups and individuals who are focused on peace we've talked about this to an extent, but one of the things that we are taking up increasingly around that same time, around December, so very close to Christmas, is what we regard as a more important sort of event in the war. And this probably is also not widely known. I've polled my students, and I think none of them have ever heard of the mutiny of December 1918, December 21st, 1918, that happened right here in Victoria. The mutiny of the 259th Battalion of soldiers who were being sent to Siberia to help put down the Bolshevik Revolution.
Right, so this was after the end of World War I.
That's important.
The power structure in the West, including Canada, did not like what was happening in what was then Russia, I guess, and they decided to send troops to assist with the White Russians against the Bolsheviks.
Yes, 14 different countries sent troops to help to suppress the Bolshevik Revolution. That's right.
Never mentioned.
Never mentioned.
In our history
yes.
books. Almost completely. What does it mean? I mean, what does that mean?
The attempt to suppress the Bolshevik Revolution, or the mutiny that occurred.
Well, let's start with the attempt to. I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, because I know absolutely nothing about it, I can't even put it into a context that would make any sense. So maybe it doesn't make any difference. You know, what does it mean? I mean, except that things happen in our name that we know nothing about and we're never told about.
The important thing, I think, what was happening at that point was that worldwide, people were up in arms. They were acting out in rebellion against the war. The mutiny of the French army in 1917, May-June 1917, had shaken the whole of the French government.
I don't know anything about that either.
Well, that's one of the significant events that helped to, I think, bring on the end of the war, because the French government understood that after May-June 1917, they could not send the French army into another of these suicidal attacks, as had happened for 3 years at that point. It spread to Italy.
Killed.
It spread to of course, to Russia, and it is happening in other parts of the world as well. In North America, there's a growing labor unrest, and so I think what we're seeing is that that worldwide there is a growing sentiment that it is not about a truce. It is about it takes up a very different sentiment, which is mutiny, and the sense of mutiny, a rebellion against the military, a rebellion against the whole idea of war, a rebellion against the political forces and the class system that had thrown these people into a war which they'd been lied to about the purpose for. So all of this is brewing, and so the men who are marshaled from across Canada, in particular from Quebec and Ontario, and they're sent across to Victoria, where they are put into training out in the so-called Willows camp, sort of near Foul Bay, and told, or
They know what the plan was for them?
yes, they know what the plan is. They're being sent to Siberia, and they have been. Some of them are conscripts, and they are arguing: one, the war is over; two, we were conscripted to fight in Europe, and we are being sent to a different location for a different purpose altogether.
Who was the prime minister at that time?
It is Robert Borden, sort of conservative sort of prime minister. And so on December 21st, they're being marched from the Willows camp to the outer wharf, right, to get on the ship that's taking them to Siberia. They set out on the march on December 21st at dawn. They are marched and they get a regular break in the British sort of military tradition. At the corner of Fort and Quadra Streets in Victoria, there is, they get a break. They're allowed a 10-minute break. When they are called to reassemble and resume the march, a section of them refuse to get up. And they shout out, many of them are from Quebec, on y va pas à Sibérie. We're not going to Siberia. And there ensues a full-scale melee in which the commanders of the battalion order loyal troops to take out off their belts and whip these soldiers into line. The so-called ringleaders are arrested, and the march is resumed under bayonet protection, essentially, so that the march continues to the ship. Those troops are court-martialed. They're punished with sort of terms of hard labor, and everybody is sent to Siberia. I should add that this is really an initiative, or the discovery of this has come out through Ben Isaac's book, Councillor Ben Isaac's book, from Victoria to Vladivostok. But for the past 4 years, we have marked December 21st. We have conducted the march. We have had a ceremony at the corner of Quadra and Fort to mark this different approach. That is mutiny, an act of international solidarity as well. These men knew that they were going to put down a people's struggle for freedom, and they would not do it.
And you know what? It seems it seems somehow timely to this very moment that we're in right now, because the same kinds of people seem to be running the world, and they seem intent on getting all of us into yet another war. And I can understand why facts like this are kept secret. They don't want people knowing that we have stood up against them, the people who run the country, not against the enemy they tell us is the enemy, who probably never was the enemy, but them, the people at the top. I really think that is the thing we really have to fear these days, is our own leadership, economic and political. I fear them more than I fear any outside forces. I think we should all think a little bit about that.
And I think that's a good point. That is that the men in the 259th Battalion understood that the Russians were not their enemy. And indeed, that if anyone was their enemy, it was more likely to be their own commanders, their own sort of political structure, their own sort of capitalist class. So they are acting on that sentiment. The commemoration is in part to note that mutiny, but also ultimately the goal is to have a full pardon for the men who were sentenced to hard labor in the mutiny, who participated in it and suffered for it. So it's an act that will link the West Coast and Quebec, since the mutineers were primarily from Quebec.
Well, good for them. You know, at least they tried to do something against the very, very powerful forces. Larry Hanant, thank you very much. And
Welcome
thank
back.
you for watching this very interesting historical look back at two very important events. Thank you. Welcome to the last segment of Citizens Forum, being filmed on Tuesday, January the 13th. I'd like to thank again the Shaw staff and our volunteer crew who makes this show happen. Our guest in this segment is Chris Cook. Chris is the managing editor of PacificFreePress.com, which will give you a good viewpoint on a lot of important world issues. And Chris is also the host of Guerrilla Radio on CFUV 101.9 FM. So, Chris, I don't know what we're going to talk about. Well, you want to start with David Rovics.
Yeah, well, it's good to see you again. Happy New Year, Jack. It's been
Happy
a
New
while.
Year.
Yeah, here we go. A bright, beautiful new year, 2015, and good things to everybody, hopefully. Although,
It's going to be an interesting year.
it is, and it really, and last year was too. Yeah, you're right. David Rovics is going to be on my show this week. I've moved my schedule. I used to go Monday evenings. Now I'm Wednesday afternoons live at CFUV, and David is a folk singer. He's been compared to Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger. He travels like you wouldn't believe. A guy, he just gets in his car and then just drives. Well, he sets up some gigs and he goes all across America, and he's a great writer. And he writes about his travels and writes about America. It's like a real travelogue of America, a social travelogue of America and what's going on.
Is he well known and popular?
Well, he's like everybody on my show, Jack. He's like the most famous guy you never heard of. He's got a following, but he doesn't get played on mainstream radio. So it's pretty tough in the music business generally right now these days. For the musicians to make money, and for small guys like him, and they don't get radio play other than like at CFUV and other college stations. It's even tougher. But yeah, most people that you'll see at the demos and that, they'll know who David is, and you'll see them when he comes. He's on the 23rd of this month, so this is airing before then, I think. And but David, the interesting thing, and what I'll be talking about with him tomorrow, is that he's a writing candidate for president in the 2016 election. So I mean, obviously he's not going to win, but he's got a platform, and his platform is brilliant in that it's just, we're not going to drop bombs on people anymore. This is America won't do this. Okay, we're going to stop doing that, and we're going to get health care for people. And, just the sort of stuff that any sane society would consist
Yes.
of.
Yes.
I mean, it's radical. Radical business, not letting grannies starve and freeze or go without water as they are in Detroit. But it made me think. I've been watching the news here these last days with Richard Atwell, and I've had Richard Atwell on my show a few times in the past, mostly talking about the sewage situation in Victoria. But thinking about David and the outsider in politics made me think a lot about Richard Atwell. We know that 90% or 95% of the time, the outsider doesn't have a chance. The incumbent is going to take it, and they'll be swept away. They can maybe bring up some salient issues, as David will. But
That's right. The outsider never wins.
The outsider, he doesn't get in. But with Richard, he got in, and I don't know how many people were, how many politicos in the know around here were betting on that. He unseated a long-term mayor, 18 years. Mayor Leonard was in the office, and what happens when the outsider wins? Well, I think we're starting to see what happens when the outsider wins. The media and the establishment is turning on him in a big way.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned something that was on, for example, the Times columnist in their story today, they used a quote from somebody else to say he was being paranoid, a little paranoid. I mean, you're stopped 4 times by the police in 2 months, and the Times columnist says if you're concerned about that, you're a little bit paranoid.
Well, he's not black either, right? So, I mean, how can we explain a white, middle-aged, well-dressed guy in a nice car getting pulled over by the police so many times,
I mean, this is very, very serious stuff that's happening, and it's being covered up now by a media smokescreen, I think, that's focusing on a personal issue that he's having and using that to cover up, I mean, to me, what are 2 very important. I mean, how can this happen? The police stop the mayoral candidate and then mayor 4 times in 2 months, force him to take a breathalyzer twice. And somebody, a friend of mine said, well, because if it works, then they've got him. They've got some power and control over him. And then the thing about the spyware on the computer, I mean,
Well, they never did that to Rob Ford, did they? I mean, who knows whether they would have found had they done it, given him a breathalyzer. But with, with Richard, and my impressions of Richard, I'm not a friend or anything. I mean, I've interviewed him a few times, and, he always came into the studios. He seems like a intensely rational and calm, level-headed guy in my experience with him. He's a little rattled now, I guess, but the real issue, and the CBC radio here in Victoria, they did a story on him this morning. This is Tuesday, the 13th, and I read his press release last night, and they reported that the instance of being pulled over by the police incorrectly on the CBC, saying that he said that he'd been pulled over 4 times since he was elected. Well, that's not the case, and he clearly stated in his press release that those 4 times were prior to the election, during the campaigning, while he was mayor-elect, and now that he's been mayor. So, I mean, this is over a long period. One of the guests on the CBC suggested, well, yeah, maybe he got pulled over 4 times, but, it's Christmas time and there's roadblocks and such, So, I mean, maybe a lot of people got stopped 4 times by the police and maybe got asked for breathalyzer samples. Now, I don't know if that's the case, if he was, stopped in roadblocks.
Oh, no, these weren't the Christmas roadblocks that, you have everybody stops
This was the
at.
impression that they were trying to create.
Oh,
right?
no, it wasn't that at all. He was targeted. I mean, what else can you say?
I don't know. But if the police are taking an active role in the political process in this country, that's pretty serious.
And on whose behalf are they doing it? Who is? I mean, really, that's the question that has to be asked. Who is behind this kind of thing? Who can make the local police here in Victoria stop a mayor and mayoral candidate and mayor-elect 4 times in 2 months and check them out?
Yeah, it's disturbing. The spyware thing, I thought all the government computers had, like the ability for people to watch so that their workers aren't, going to porn sites or getting up to some kind of mischief or who knows what, I thought that was a normal thing. Now, I don't know, I'm not technically savvy enough to know that if this is something
Nor am
again,
but no, this was, my understanding is that Saanich IT staff came forward to Richard and told him that they had been instructed to put certain type of very, the kind of spyware that when you're typing, somebody else is
keystroke
reading.
monitoring,
Yeah. So they were instructed to put it on.
Or somebody said that
Or
they were. There's going to be, well,
there's
hey, but
affidavits and.
I got to. Richard's made politics interesting, local municipal politics interesting around here, at least, if nothing else. I mean, I bet you that the next Saanich meetings it's going to be standing room only. And then how often do you see that? When, I mean, what was the turn? Do you know, Jack, the last election? What the turnout was, the percentage wise?
It was, I think, significantly
25?
higher than it had been in the past. But, Richard was involved with an issue that was going to waste $1 billion. And if it's wasting $1 billion of public money, then that money is going somewhere.
It's never wasted, Jack. Somebody makes that money.
Yeah, exactly.
And if he's getting in the way of people that are making that kind of coin, he's already making some enemies.
And I mean, we may not even need sewage treatment here, but at least if we do need it and we're going to build the infrastructure, then let's be sure we build the best and most forward-looking and least expensive project we can build. And this project, from the beginning, going back 5 or 6 or 7 years when it got started, the things that were happening, largely manipulated by the staff, because you often get the feeling that a lot of the city councillors really don't know what's going on or seem to be unable to act in the best interests of the people of the city. They're just kind of, I just get the feeling that they're not really the ones controlling the agenda. It's often the staff.
I asked Richard, before he was elected, what he expected going in there should he be elected, and then the thing is you come in as an outsider, you don't know the inner workings of how things go, and you feel like a bit of an idiot. And it's the same, I'm sure, for the guys on the CRD who sit there and have engineers stand there in front of them and say, this is that and that's it. Who am I to say otherwise? This guy's an engineer, or These guys have been in the political game for a long time, but it's again, it's an establishment thing. You know, the process around the sewage treatment decisions around here, that's really the scandal. And this starts to raise questions about, you know, who is benefiting from going one way rather than another, you know. And Richards has been in the way, and of course the mayor was sat on the CRD as well, so the former mayor.
And if the Times columnist would have given as much coverage to that issue that you just talked about, like the ridiculous decision-making process that led us into this mess that almost cost us $1 billion down the drain for no environmental gain.
Well, we're not out of the woods yet.
And we're not out of the woods yet.
But you're
where
right, we
was
should
the
have
media?
something forward-looking and something that we can co-generate. And there's great technologies available right now. This is the thing. We're at this, you know, wonderful time of expansion of technology that we really could start making a difference. And yet we've got to kick the door down of the old establishment ways of doing things, both politically and corporate-wise. You know?
Well, when I first got started with an issue that was kind of municipal, had to do with the CRD, it was the water department.
Yeah, I recall
And this
that,
is
yeah.
going back into the early 1990s when the Water Commission at that time and the media together basically faked a water shortage in the city of Victoria, scared a lot of people.
To expand the
And
reservoir.
they had a plan to expand the reservoir, or so it seemed, because that's what, you know, that's what was on the drawing boards. What they did was, it was a long process, but it ended with them draining 3 or 4 of our smaller reservoirs, right? Because they had to do some work on their dams. And once those were drained, then by the rule book, we didn't have enough water in storage. And so they told us we have a water shortage. Well, yeah, we did have a water shortage, but only because they had drained the reservoirs. The media would never report that. That's the way this city is run, folks, and it's killing us.
Well, speaking of the dam, you know, I went out to Jordan River a few weeks ago and talked to some of the locals there. And you've heard, I guess, about the seismic testing that BC Hydro discovered that should, I think it's a 7, you know, it starts at a 7-point and up
Yeah.
earthquake strike within, and I'm not sure how near it has to be, then they fear that the dam could collapse. And there's 11 householders that live right at Jordan River. If you go out to Renfrew, you'll go right past the river, you'll see the surfers and everybody, and a few householders, and BC Hydro just showed up on these guys' doorstep literally at supper time. They had no idea of any of this beforehand, and handed them notices telling them that, oh, by the way, that, you know, this dam could fail and wash you into the sea. We'd like you to sell your houses to us. And then they just left and left the community, you know,
In a state of shock.
They were in and still are in a state of shock, and they're angry as well, you know. And, you know, you got to wonder, well, you know, maybe can...
Well, you know, it's funny that BC Hydro is so very concerned about the safety of those people, because there's huge issues in this city with electromagnetic radiation, which really is dangerous to people. It comes off all the hydro equipment and all the electrical equipment. And it's, you know, it's possible to deal with those things if you go out and just improve the way things are done. But Hydro pretends there is no problem. So for all the millions of people across the country that are all impacted by electrical issues and electromagnetic radiation, like, there's no concern about them. But suddenly, oh, you know, the 11 families in Jordan River, you might, if there's a dam break, we care about you so much that we want to force you off your houses.
Well, it certainly is great, though, for all those people for all those years who, you know, have been denounced and debased as conspiracy theories or tinfoil hat wearers. Now, they were right.
They were right. Yeah, they were right. You wanted to talk about Dar Jamal.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's another guest coming on the show. Dar Jamal is a fascinating guy. He's an American. He lives just across the water here. This morning on the CBC...
And he's a journalist.
He's a freelance journalist. He went to Iraq by himself in 2003. A totally unembedded journalist. Although he's a Lebanese, his family came from Lebanon to America, but he grew up in the States, doesn't speak Arabic. But he said he was just so frustrated at the kind of media reports he was getting on the early days of the war. So he managed to get himself into this war zone and when this at the most dangerous time in that first year, if you recall. But especially for journalists, who both the Americans were shooting and with cannons and everything else, and were being kidnapped, and it was pretty brave. He's shifted his focus in recent years to environmental issues now, and he lives over in Port Townsend there, just across the water from us. Well, and today on the CBC, they were talking about these so-called growlers, these jet planes that are being tested just out of the Air Force Base just south of us here. And a lot of the people in Victoria can hear them too, that very low rumbling sound. Well, these are fighter jets going through their paces. What Dar is working on, though, and what I'll be talking about with him in a couple of weeks' time, is the plan to do. Do you remember in New Brunswick when it was a big scandal that our Air Force and invited Air Forces were doing low altitude practices, and it was scaring the wildlife and ruining the hunting and everything for the First Nations there. Well, a similar plan now is for the Olympic Peninsula, where they're going to use the parks there to run all these low altitude air exercises and other military exercises there. So the people in Washington State, especially up on the peninsula, the Olympic Peninsula, they're up in arms now, and these exercises are due to get going later in the year.
The people around the United States are totally insane, and I mean the people around Canada too. And I don't necessarily mean only the politicians, because they're just the puppets, but
I don't know if it's insanity, Jack. I think they're unsane. I mean, they're not like full-on crazy. I mean, you can see lots of examples of that, but they're refusing to be sane. It's sort of an insanity by omission. And you can really make yourself believe a lot of things. And the famous saying that if it's hard to convince a man of the truth when his livelihood depends on propagating the lie. Right?
But we're almost at a time in a situation now where if we don't stop them, I mean, they are just like they did in World War I, as we were talking with the previous guest. They massacred people by the hundreds of thousands because it suited them, the leadership, the corrupt leadership of both sides. And they're ready to do it to us. I don't know why, but that just seems to be where they're taking us.
Well, I think it's important, Jack, to remember they are we and we are they, right? I mean, we're a part of this. We're a part of the whole. I mean, we can point and say, oh, you guys are doing terrible things, but we are all a part of this. We're all complicit in it one way or the other. We can work against it, but we're still complicit. We still enjoy the benefits of the way we rape nature, the way we go into other countries and steal their resources.
But I think a lot of us would like to slow down, stop if we can, but there's absolutely no forum for doing it. We're powerless.
Hey, there's this show. This is the forum. We're going to stop it, and we're going to win. We're all going to win together.
Chris Cook, thanks very much. And thank you for watching Citizens Forum this week.